On definitionmining.com, I wrote that communication is an attempt to achieve the same experience without the same observations. And I've been thinking about what that means to me and how definitions can help describe what I'm experiencing. All the information that creates our conscious experiences originally started out as electrical signals, traveling on neurons up into our brains. And once the information gets to our brains, it's processed in a lot of different ways, but the eventual result is signals traveling the other way, out of our brains and into our bodies. And that's the thing that causes our actions. Our brains are networks that take in inputs on some nerves, make lots of connections, and generate outputs on some other nerves. A lot of this processing we can think of as a kind of pattern matching or learning. Some parts of the network have learned to recognize some patterns and they respond with particular outputs in those situations. Also, somewhere in our brain we obviously have consciousness. All the information from our senses is combined together and it feeds into our conscious experience. Let's call that stream of information observations. Then there's other kinds of information that our brain creates that we're conscious of too, besides observation. I've used the term expectations in a few definitions, and that's an important part of what we're aware of. For example, let's say we have a glass of water, and before I touch it, I'm aware of some expectations. How I'll feel, how the ice will look. That's information that the pattern matching in my brain creates in response to what I'm observing. And I think that's a good definition of what expectations are. They're the conscious experience of pattern matching. So what else is there that I'm conscious of? We have things like memory or imagination. Now, when I think about those, both memory and imagination feel like different kinds of expectations to me. The expectations I have when I'm about to pick up a glass feel the same as if I try to remember what it was like the last time I did pick up a glass. And it feels the same as if I were imagining it instead. All three of these things have the same kind of feeling to me. And even though they're caused by different things, they feel the same. So I'm going to group them up and just call them all expectations. They're all different ways of being conscious of different kinds of pattern matching happening in my brain. So we have our stream of observations, and we have another with expectations. And in our consciousness, we should also include emotions. I had written that emotions are caused by changes in our expectations. And we can see how that would happen in our consciousness. We have these two streams of information, and if we compare them, and if our expectations are different than reality, then we'll have to change our expectations. And maybe that change will make us happy or sad or just leave us surprised, but I can see how changing expectations could create lots of different emotions. And what should we call this whole comparison process? To me, the word that describes it best is attention. It's the process of focusing on one part of what I'm observing, and I'm trying to find new information there. So how do I do that? Well, by seeing how it's different than what I expected. If I have these two streams of information, and there's a situation where there's not much difference between them, I might need to look very closely to find something new. Or let's say we have a situation where my expectations were vague and I might not be able to spot the difference right away. I might need to look at lots of different areas to find what I'm looking for. But I feel like that's what we mean when we say we're paying attention to something. We're making this kind of comparison. And maybe this comparison causes me to make a choice, and that leads to some kind of output. Or another possibility might be that my expectations in this moment could change, and that they then become part of my expectations in the next moment. They loop back. We could think of this looping back as a kind of short-term memory, or maybe working memory. It lets us take another look at our expectations as they're changing to see if they're a better fit now. Of course, we already have one feedback loop that we use to learn and update our expectations, and that's the world. When we do anything, it causes a change in the world, and we can observe that. And so then our choices and actions are creating new feedback that come back, and new observations and new expectations. But that's a relatively long and slow process of guess and check, which is especially bad if we're trying to look for a complicated pattern or deeper meaning. But this conscious loop here provides a similar kind of feedback. It's faster because we can check and update our expectations very quickly without waiting for changes in the real world. It's just a quick way to create new expectations and check to see if they make sense before we act on them. And if this lets us make the same kinds of good choices over and over again, then hopefully those patterns of inputs and outputs will start to get wired together in our brain. We'll start to learn how to react to new situations or a new pattern, and over time we won't have to think about or pay close attention to that kind of situation anymore, which is really just a different way to describe learning. It's different ways of wiring being created in our brain. And really that's what I'm trying to do with these definitions. I'm trying to figure out how I experience the world and how these definitions are patterns I found by focusing on some piece of information over and over again until it clicked. And if they're useful, I'll keep using them, and maybe that will change the way I think about things. And now I'm trying out this larger feedback loop. I'm hoping you'll find them useful too, and we can see what kind of changes and feedback they'll generate. So hopefully we can all understand our experiences a little better.